Hi, my name is Jordan. I am a special education teacher from the UK. I share my passion for everything communication, sensory regulation and fun lesson ideas for my classroom of disabled pupils aged 4 to 11. Each week, I am joined by experts in the field, answering your questions and sharing our knowledge and experience working alongside our beautiful young people. Let's get started. Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode. Today I am joined by Jessie, who is mum and educator and talks loads about PDA on her profile, on her social media profile. And it is a topic that I am very new to and learning about. I've never had a child in my class that has been formally named as having a PDA profile. However, after watching your videos and videos from other creators talking about PDA, lots of children spring to mind that I have worked with over the years. So I'm really keen to learn more. So Jessie, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about how you came into the space and what your relationship is with PDA.
So my name's Jessie, obviously. I am mum to 3 boys. I've got an older son, Leon. He's just about to start his GCSE, so he's nearly 16. And then we have 7-year-old twins. Maxie, our youngest twin, is just been diagnosed with ADHD. At the moment, we're pretty adamant he has got a PDA profile. Okay. So we are in the final stages of his ASD diagnosis because unfortunately PDA in the UK isn't actually recognised as a formal diagnosis.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Does
it have to be paired? I think alongside ADHD or ASD? Or...
I think it can be. It totally depends on, it's such a caveat of so many moving complex parts that I think until, every child is so different, they could have ASD, they could have ADHD, they could have ADD. So again, until that child, they may show indications that they've got ASD, but then there's some parts of it that just don't make sense. And I think that's how we initially started to sort of think something isn't quite right here.
And about what kind of age was that? What did you notice and when did you notice those things? I guess you've got a twin, so you've got in a lucky position of being able to kind of had a direct comparison, weren't you?
Well, yeah, and obviously because we've got an older son, it was always, Maxie he's verbal, he's like his motor skills, he's always hit those milestones at the correct time. There were a few things when he was, learning to walk and talking, but that was just down to the fact that Jake, his twin, did everything first. So Jake did everything for him. So he was like, I'm just going to sit here and I don't need to do anything because my twin brother's going to go and get me my drink or he'll answer for me. But the real indication that there was something not quite, that the behaviour wasn't sort of the terrible twos, when they were at nursery, they moved from, not the baby room, when they moved from like the toddler room up to the preschool room, obviously his demand, unbeknown to us, the demand starts to rise because they are slowly prepping them for that introduction into reception. So they start to get a little bit more formal and it's a bit more, right, we're going to sit down and do work now.
Yes, they have higher expectations, don't they?
Yeah, the expectation rises. And then obviously with that becomes also the demand because there's an expectation that you need to be able to conform to when you go and are ready to go to primary school. And it's then really that it started to get quite explosive, just even little things, little things, throwing chairs, that was, and that I think initially we were just, we just thought, oh, maybe he's just bored maybe he's just bored there.
Yeah.
It's like, it's quite generic, isn't it? And it's quite not boring, but I think if you're an intelligent child and you're ready to move on, because they're born in October, they were obviously at nursery for an extra year effectively. If they'd been born a month earlier, they would have started the year before. So we put it down to boredom, really. We just thought, he's going to, because he really, really, really loves writing, even though he struggles with it now.
Intelligent lad. He is really intelligent, stimulated in that way in nursery. Yeah, of course you think that.
And he's super social.
Yeah.
But then when there was a few occasions when, the phone rang, and it's like the nursery, we're thinking, oh, what's happened now? And, Max had, they'd asked him to, just do little things, but he just couldn't cope. So the anxiety obviously then starts to rise, and then he basically can't cope with those demands, which then can result, if it's not dealt with, in a declarative language way, or it's not dealt with calmly and quickly, it will just escalate and to the point where it can explode. And those preschool nursery rooms, they are busy. There's a lot of children. There's more than a mainstream primary school.
Lots of children, loud, busy, cluttered often.
Yes, totally cluttered. And it's very different to our home environment. Even though there's 5 of us in our house, our house doesn't have 60 children in it, and it doesn't. Yeah. And the building's quite old that they went to nursery in, so the echoes used to travel. So we kind of thought, it's definitely down to the fact that they are.
Were you seeing it not at home then? You weren't seeing those similar reactions to demands, or were you?
We were to an extent, but obviously when he was at home, the demand's a lot lower.
Yeah, of course they are. Yeah.
So, and he's in his safe, but unbeknown to us.
He's not anxious, yeah, exactly.
He's not anxious, and at home is his safe space.
So also, naturally, without even knowing it, I bet you'd kind of worked out how to phrase things.
We just thought he was a little
without
bit...
even realising it.
And I think to start with, we just thought he was not difficult, because that's the wrong word. We just thought he was a little bit more sensitive.
Yes.
Obviously
emotional.
And he does have, a twin brother who's the polar opposite. Jake doesn't, he's like bouncing about all the time. He's always, and Maxie can be, he was getting quite reserved sometimes. But then the occasions started to get more frequent. Yeah. And they were starting to ramp up in terms of severity, pulling off glasses off the teacher, of his nursery assistants. And I think, that when they're in that toddler room and that baby room, it's all very nicey. It's painting some pasta shapes and they stick it down, or they can just have a little cuddle.
Yeah, and also those behaviours can be more easily not reacted to or not seen as so negative and this awful thing because they're 2 or because they're 1. And lots of toddlers react in big emotional ways. That's very
toddler-like. That's what toddlers do.
Toddler-like. So I can imagine that even if it was always happening, that all of a sudden they have this 3, 4, 5-year-old doing the similar things that he's always been doing.
Yeah.
All of a sudden he's getting a different reaction. The reaction of the adults is that it's bad and that it shouldn't happen and it's naughty.
Yes,
and that's the change, isn't it?
That's and then they obviously were trying to discipline him.
Yes.
And obviously the discipline is very, you can't do this, you can't do that. And, timeouts, we've never been a fan really of timeouts full stop with any of our children. But timeouts then became quite a issue where things would then escalate even more and there'd be, throwing chairs. And then to sort of intercept it quite quickly, they would remove him from the class, right, from the classroom, which we were quite pleased about. They had a sensory room and he was quite happy going in the sensory room, like he really enjoyed it. And then he started spending quite a lot of time upstairs in the nursery manager's office, and he was like printing out pictures. And it was then, and I'll never forget, he just suddenly got this mad obsession with birds, and they were printing out bird pictures for him. And then he just had an absolute refusal to go back to the classroom. Whenever he went to nursery, he was absolutely adamant.
He found a safer place he felt comfortable.
Oh, he's just obsessed with birds. And this kind of went on for a couple of weeks. And I said to Darren, my husband, just something's not right here. My gut instinct is telling me, is he autistic? I don't know. I don't think he shows the key characteristic traits of of a child who's autistic. However, there is something that is just not quite right that we couldn't put our finger on.
Yeah, and there's a neurodiversity there. His brain works differently than his peers.
That's it.
He needs different things than his peers. Whatever you call it, there was something there. You had a motherly
my gut. I train human factors in my professional work, and I was just thinking, I train people on following your gut instinct, and I knew something. We were discussing it one night, and I said, there's just something not quite right here. He's had his preschool checks, he's hit all the markers, he's done all those milestones.
And it's not academic.
I said it's not academic
because he's social. You said he was really social.
He is really social. He loves it, and he's really academic, and he really enjoys the academic side of work when his nervous system allows him to. I mean,
and this is it, isn't it?
Yeah, they start to prep for phonics in preschool, and phonics is renowned for children that have neurodivergent needs. It is a really difficult thing for them to grasp because of the complexities. It's the sound, it's the context,
and it's not often how they learn.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And it's very, I think our education system is very rigid, and it's way for a while.
It's for a certain type of learners, and it works really, really well for certain learners. But the fact is, as we're all aware, that there are a lot more learners that it doesn't work for.
Exactly.
So, because I know that you homeschool now, so we're in nursery. What does the pathway look like from him being in the manager's office at nursery to you starting school and then you deciding to homeschool? What happened in that?
I mean, the homeschool thing was just totally, well, not accidental, but we were really were under no choice. As a matter of fact, that's just, it's a decision that we had to make. So basically, I think they obviously went up in the September. So at the start of that year, where are we now? 2025, 2022. One of the nursery assistants said to me, listen, I've got a son who's 21 and he has something called pathological demand avoidance. And I was a bit like, wow.
Well, it sounds quite, when you talk about pathological, it sounds
like they're psycho. I'm not going to lie. I was thinking
it's really poorly named, I think. I don't know if you agree.
It's awful. And in America, which is interesting, in the States, they call it pervasive drive for autonomy, which is basically, it is a lack of autonomy due to high levels of anxiety.
So much more sense.
It makes so much more sense. And for that, and we kind of said to, and I never forget her name, Vicky, she said, my son had this is 20 years, 10, 15 years ago, that, going through the mainstream schooling system was a nightmare for him. He was that naughty child. He was that disruptive child that was always getting into fights. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of thought, oh, okay, whatever, as you do.
Yeah.
But our local authority then came to the children's services. They came to sort of have a chat with us at their nursery and sort of said, I think next steps, we're going to come and observe him. And we said, yeah, that's absolutely fine. See what you think. And they came and they said, yeah, we think he'll be all right. Just send him, he'll be all right going to mainstream. Obviously,
because he's academic.
Because he's academic. And because he was walking.
He was hitting his milestone. So why would they spend their money, their tax money, on finding him a suitable provision? This is a problem we're seeing.
Yeah, so we just were, just trust our local authority.
Yeah, of course. Why wouldn't you? They're the experts. Yeah, of course.
And I remember sitting there with her and she sort of said to me, but he can talk, but he can hold a pen, but he can brush his teeth. He doesn't have any issues with food. He's he's never been over sensory, apart from really loud noises. And we sort of said, yeah, that's, something isn't quite right, but we don't really know what it is. So they went off to mainstream in the September. They were separated in class, which was a decision that we felt was the right decision for them. We just felt that as twins, and their primary school, sort of their procedure is we would prefer twins to be separated.
Yeah.
And if they are together, we would keep them just together for reception. If they were on the younger side of that year, so if they would know the just turned fours, not the fives, 5-year-olds, and we sort of said, yeah, we think it'd be really beneficial for them for both of them.
Yeah.
So they obviously went off to school in the September, and they had that phased introduction for the first sort of 3 or 4 weeks, and everything was okay. And it got to, Christmas, and the cracks were then starting to show.
Right. Because expectations start to rise.
And I remember him coming home from school, and he was like, I have to sit on the carpet every day and clap my hands, and he's like, I don't want to sit there. And when he sort of said, it's a nice carpet. He said, but I don't like it. And he said, I'm not sitting there. So we spoke to his teacher, and she was amazing, and she really, she's firm, but she's firm and she's fair. Really experienced primary school teacher. Yeah, firm and fair, very experienced. And she said, look, do you mind? I think for Max, we're going to, and I think this is another issue, the logistics, the layout of the school is, it's a 3-class year. So the whole of infants are in an open plan, basically, classroom.
Wow.
Wild.
So overwhelming.
So it gives me anxiety, Jordan, when I have to go into school. I'm like, I can't cope, I need headphones. So they have some classrooms, but there's no the reception classes are all open plan, and there's like a pulley door, but they keep them open because like all of their resources, their breakout areas, they're all behind. So they said, do you mind if we remove him from the actual class and sit him on a table behind, like in a part of the classroom, but it's not actually in the class? We said, yeah, of course. That we want him to succeed.
Helps him manage.
Yeah, we want him to succeed in school. So then that kind of worked for another term, but then his resistance to actually doing the expectation of what he was supposed to be doing, the resistance then started then, and the pushing back and the screaming and the shouting. And then he started to spend quite a lot of time in like the timeout sensory room. And then one day we got a phone call saying that they'd put him in there, and he'd obviously, he just, because it's a nervous system disability, he can't control it. No. So when he goes from 0 to 100, if he's in an enclosed space, he would just pick up everything. And
it's very unsafe, isn't it? For him, for others.
And it was a real sensory room. It wasn't a breakout room that we see now in SCMH and specialist schools where there is nothing.
It was sensory.
It's a sensory, so chairs got
thrown. Quite overstimulating again.
And then it resulted in the fact that he'd managed to get out of the classroom, and there was some other reception children sitting outside doing phonics, like split between the TA and the class teacher. And he had just, the noise, the dysregulation and sort of the chaos of coming out of there, like seeing red, he then started to pick up chairs. So they basically then had to like evacuate the entire area, which then made him even more stressed out.
Of course.
So they have like the fridge where the reception milk and stuff used to sit, and he tried to push the fridge over.
Yeah. He's trying to make everyone else feel like he feels right. He is in absolute fight, fright or flight mode.
Yeah.
And he is just terrified. I can imagine. I can feel it as you're describing it. His heart rate must have been so high that you don't make sensible decisions in that frame of mind, do you?
Nobody does in fight, flight or freeze. Yeah, exactly. So then we had a meeting with a Senko they've supported us and the head teacher the entire time, because obviously our eldest son went there. And she sort of said, I think we should speak to CAMS and like MindWorks, who obviously we live in Surrey, and they'll come out. So they came out and sort of they observed him, and they sort of said, we'll try and do some strategies. Obviously that didn't work.
Yeah.
Because I think the environmental factor was one of the main.
They were thinking mental health, which is true. Of course it is.
Yeah, totally.
But because of the environmental.
It's the environmental factor that kind of adds to it.
Unless you change that, you could do amazing work with his mental health, but unless the environment changes, nothing's going to change, is it?
Yeah, and then so basically after Easter they went back for the summer term, and then things just started to get really out of control. So we reduced him down to just mornings, because we were just like, we just can't do it, because then when he was coming home, it was just absolute carnage. We couldn't regulate him. He was really out of control. He wanted to go to school, but he couldn't. And then in the mornings when we were walking to school, we'd get to the same spot every single morning, and he would just say, I've got a tummy ache, I can't go into school.
Is it anxiety?
The anxiety was building up. We get to literally the same place every single morning. We walk behind the footpath is behind the main school field, and every single so you can see it, because the fence is it's like a see-through metal fence, and you could see him. He was kind of looking at it, and then you get to the point where the alleyway leads to walk round to the front of the school, and at exactly the same point he'd say, Mum,
your anxiety at that point was bubbling too, because if it was the exact same point, you'd be like, okay, it's coming up, he's gonna refuse, or I don't know I don't want to put words into your mouth. How were you feeling in that time of him not wanting to be, him clearly not being happy and wanting to go in, but you wanting to do what's best for him? He's academic, you want him to be in education. What was going through your head during all this as well?
Again, it was really quite confusing, because I think we'd had somebody else, our Senko had said, have you thought about PDA? And I said, well, they'd said it again. And then she said, when MindWorks came out and sort of sat down with us, she sort of said, have a little look at this literature. It's just, this PDA Society. But again, it's when you start to Google PDA, apart from the PDA Society website, there isn't really much out there. And it's all the sort of same information. No demand parenting, but again, what does that actually look like? But nothing about sort of the school environment. So we reduced him down for the rest of the term. Summer was amazing because I'm fortunate enough with my job that I have the summer holidays off. We had a great summer.
It
So
was
I was thinking,
child-led, it was things that he loves.
he's
He
messing
felt
around with his
safe, he felt
brother.
listened
We're going on
to,
holiday. We're going to see
he
Nanny
had
and Grampy.
autonomy. Yeah.
He's not at school.
And
But
he's
we didn't
not
think
at
about that.
school.
We just thought, oh, it's the summer holidays. I remember when I was a kid and I used to love the summer holidays. You know, it's like, yay. Went back for the start of year one, lasted approximately about 6. I mean,
You just saw a massive decline from after the summer.
Yeah, so really from like the Christmas of reception, he was on a reduced timetable straight away, which then resulted in, you know, us having to, we started to homeschool because we were having to fill the gaps in.
Right.
And we were told very early on, you know, the homeschooling, it's really important to keep them on roll because if you remove a child from the enroll system, later down the line, if you need further help and support, it actually, even though, I mean, this is mind-blowing, it actually can be more of a detriment with your local authority with an EHCP having a child out of education and not on roll. So then we were like...
Well, it looks like your choice, doesn't it? This is the problem that I've seen with parents.
Yeah.
If it's the school saying they can't meet the need, that's a different thing. But if it is parents... I mean, it is both. It's always both. But if the parent makes that decision first,
you're held accountable for it.
You're not eligible for any funding because it's your
responsibility.
And I've seen that over and over again.
And so our Senko and headmistress said, whatever happens, we need to keep him here until. So obviously the EHCP stuff had started, and you know we were homeschooling basically from after Easter in reception because we were quite concerned that if there was a really big gap, then is he going to be able to catch up? You know, can he survive in the mainstream setting environment? We didn't know. Is it just integration? Is it because we split him from his twin brother? That was another consideration.
And then you've had COVID as well. Like there's so many questions.
We were just like,
on.
Is this you know? Yeah. Have we actually made the wrong decision here?
It actually could have been any one of those mentalities. Like, it's easy to say now, isn't it? Well, of course it was PDA. But actually, it could have been any one of those things. Lots of children also struggle with the transition, a huge transition into
transitions are huge.
Especially you're a twin, especially after COVID. All of these things, all of those things could have been a possible reason.
So we really didn't. We kind of, again, were a bit, not in denial, but because, again, those milestones have been hit.
Yeah.
We'd spoken to the doctor, and the doctor was just like, you know, what's the problem? Basically, he's just struggling at school, like throwing stuff around, you know, maybe he's, you know, the good old thing, are they tired? Are they hungry? And I was thinking, I don't know about this. This is not. So... we kind of would, you know, just doing a couple of hours work a day with him, you know, just like, you know, watching number blocks.
How was that going? Was it quite a positive experience? He was willing
on the days where it depended on what they did with him in the morning at school, completely dictated to how his behaviour was then for the rest of the day.
Makes sense.
And, you know, some days they were just, you know, keeping his head above water, so to speak, just to keep him there. He then went back, in September into year one, and we had quite a few meetings before the summer term had broken up, sort of saying, you know, our concerns. And they sort of said, you know, well, once the HCP, like he'll get more funding and he'll have a full-time TA hopefully if the funding goes through. So we went back in September, you know, completely. I don't think even naive. Just thought, oh, you know, it will be all over if we get the funding. Yeah. And he has a one-on-one TA. So off we went back to September, lasted probably not even to the half term in October. And then we were on I think, quite close to transition of getting in burnout.
Yeah.
And then sort of a month after them going back, I think it was the start of October, our Senko officer, Joe, said to us that, listen, there is a PRU that we really recommend that he goes to the pupil referral unit, and we're going to call them because we cannot cope with him in school because
they were saying we cannot keep him safe.
We can't keep him safe. She said we cannot meet his needs, and you know, she said when he is regulated, he's a dream student, but because of the class sizes, you know, and because now the safeguarding incident with other children,
so they'd exhausted everything they could offer as an environment.
They had done everything.
Anymore.
They couldn't offer him anything else.
And that isn't the fault of the school, is it?
Like,
ultimately, it is the wrong environment
totally the wrong environment. So, you know, hearing that, you know, you're going to be, so we sort of said, well, what does that mean? And I remember I was at work and I remember just sitting on this bench with my mate from work, and I was just sort of said, oh my God, they want to take him out of mainstream and send him off to a pupil referral unit for an entire term in January. You know, it's nowhere near our house. He's got to go in transport. He was 6, just turned 6, no, because they were 5, coming up to 6. And I said to my husband, I thought, I was like, oh my God, I'm the worst mum ever. You know, he's going off. And I sort of said to the Senko, well, what if we don't want him to go? And she said, basically, if you don't send him, if we don't agree, she said, it's going to look like refusal from the parents. She said, and there will be no other options basically offered. Yeah. She said, and really,
it's
what
good
you
advice,
need,
because unfortunately that is the truth, isn't it?
It's the truth. And I sort of remember sitting there thinking, so you're telling me that basically
it's this or nothing.
It's this or nothing. And she said, even though you may be completely distraught about this decision, she said, what it does enable though is that it enables a pattern to be built, dependent on how he then behaves when he's at the PRU.
Yes.
If, you know, the environment is correct. Anyway, he obviously didn't go back so he finished year 1 a couple of weeks early because it was just getting too much. And then we'd taken him to the PRU, you know, he really loved it. There were classes of 6 children. They had a therapy dog, Gemma.
They understood that kind of, you know,
and we weren't
defiancy kind of
profile
exactly. Children and PDA profile children. They understood that because lots of the children that are educated in PRUs are that kind of profile child, aren't they?
Yeah, so we went and Darren and I, my husband, went and visited it, and we just, you know, we absolutely loved it. And we said, yeah, I think, you know, we have to try it because
worth a try, isn't it?
We have to try it. It's only for a term. It's not even, it's a long term anyway. And I said, no, it's not that long. You know, we haven't got to worry about transport. You know,
what if this is the answer?
And I said to Darren, what if he just goes here for 4 months and I don't know, he comes back to mainstream and he's a different child. So he went off, he had 3 weeks of utter chaos. You know, he was getting picked up, you know, the transport's obviously provided by the local authorities. So that was something else that we didn't have to worry about. But again, I'm then packing my 6-year-old child off in a car with a stranger.
Yeah, it's
but the
huge.
Thing is, it is huge. But a thing that we have really noticed about PDA children, well, my personal experience, they are so resilient that the resilience in parents needs to be more, is what you need to build on, because you're just going, you know, up and down out of all these different emotions. But Maxie, the first day, he just, you know, the car pulled up and he's just like, yeah, see you, Mum, just got on the back of this car, drove off. I was like, oh my God.
Wow.
And he was just like waving out the window and off he went.
Resilience isn't something that we hear about, is it? But actually maybe that needs to be spoken more about as it's a resilience, because that's an incredible skill, isn't it?
I mean, absolutely was not phased. I mean, leading up to, so when he was leading up to, in the summer holidays before they started mainstream, he had such bad anxiety that he was constantly going to the toilet. I mean, his toilet habits, you know, he was going to the toilet probably 20 times a day due to nerves. And that settled quite quickly once he started mainstream, even though it wasn't right. But when the Christmas before, in the holidays at Christmas before he started the PRU, like the frequent urination started, and I said, he's starting to get, he's anxious now, even though he's not saying it. We took him for the first couple of days, but the headmaster said to us, he was just like, listen, it's better for them to go in the transport because of the way it is. The taxis pull up, the gate opens, they drive up, they come, the doors get open, the teachers get them out. It's like this. He said it's
quite routine.
It's routine, and Maxie loves
that.
And he loves it. You know, he's like cruising away in this Tesla, going off to, you know, cruising off to school.
Amazing.
And he thrived. He was an outstanding student, like within a month or so, you know, once
the environment was right
environment, he loved it.
Children, probably less cluttered, less staff that understood him and how he learns and how
they had 3 teachers in a class of 7 children.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't, you know, they capped it at how many they took anyway.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they ate together, they had breakfast, lunch and dinner, there were, you know, breakout rooms for them, they had a therapy dog, they went on school trips. He did so much for him. He did so much he just did so much in that short period of time. And then he obviously, the PRU is a short-term interim sort of
okay.
It's a short-term interim sort of offer. It's only if you're...
Because expensive.
It's expensive, and I think also it's for children that don't have an EHCP also. I mean, in Surrey, I believe it's because the majority are children that can't meet, that the mainstream school can't meet need, or it's children that are in that grey area of they haven't got an EHCP.
Might get expelled, but you want to keep them in education, that kind of middly bridge.
Yeah, and I think that, there were some children there that were in the year 5 and 6 class because they sort of accumulated some of the classes together because there was not that many students. They had been expelled.
Yeah.
I grew up a PRU unit was generally for used, and I'm 40 for PRU unit was generally for children that had, behavioural issues, whether or not it was generated.
That's what you're told, right?
It's
violent. They've got behavioural issues. They've got trauma.
Got parents in prison. You've got whatever. Their home life is dreadful.
It's just not true.
No,
that's what people think. But actually, you visit. I mean, you see how wonderful and just outside the box thinking, creative, kind, loving.
Yeah, and it was just
led, affirming all of these wonderful things.
And it was just so amazing. It was life-changing. Yeah. So obviously, his teachers visited, the PRU unit visited his mainstream. And I remember speaking to the head mistress at the PRU, and she said, she said the layout of the school is...
So she could see it.
She said the layout of the school is going to be an issue on the integration back. And we were just like, he's doing really well.
Yeah.
So he went back, and that was that would be... Is it a year last year he went back? Yeah. So he went back. So he went back. So he, went there this time last year, went until Easter, and we're like, oh, they've nailed it now. We've nailed it. He's going to be able to. He's going to integrate himself back.
It's dangerous thinking, isn't it? Because it's an environment thing. It's not a him thing.
And then literally we went back after Easter, and within 2 days he was excluded for 5 days.
I believe it, because also he's going to be even more frustrated than he was before because he knows how school can be. It's almost like when in a job, like if you've been to this amazing job that you've had to leave and then you start your old job again, you're going to be even more resentful, aren't you?
Well, and I think that, a couple of weeks before he finished, he'd started to say, I don't want to go back to mainstream. I don't want to go back to my school.
Anxiety already was bubbling.
Yeah, and he just said, and I'd asked him, what is it? And he just said, it's just, he said, Mummy, I just don't like, he said, I just don't want to go. So we kind of said, it's obviously is it anxiety, the PDA thing. Yeah, he went back. I think he was back 2 days or 3 days. Then he was excluded for that entire week. And then a bit after, from the get-go said that he was not going to be able to meet, they weren't going to be able to meet needs and be there with normal school hours. Yeah, so he went back anyway on a reduced timetable straight away. So then we were homeschooling.
Yeah.
And he basically I think he had over 15 days worth of exclusions by the time they'd got to half term or just after.
And he was already on a reduced timetable.
He's on a reduced timetable.
His need, were they? Or keep him safe.
And he was just, it was going for an hour, an hour a day.
And meanwhile, he's building so much animosity and anger towards education, school, learning. And you don't want this, from going 3, who loved writing and reading and learning, you didn't want, I can imagine, to lose that.
We didn't want him to have, education PTSD, because we were thinking...
trauma, I can imagine children do face that.
Yeah, totally. So he went back, and we sort of really struggled getting him in he was going in until 11. So then I topped up the homeschooling in the afternoons. And he was actually a little better going back from after being at the PRU, because they had given me the strategies.
Right.
I had spoken to them and said, like, how do you educate him? Like, what do you do? What do you not do that mainstream do? And they said, like, we don't do reward charts.
Yeah, can we talk about some of the things? Because people will be listening to this thinking, I've got a child in my class that sounds exactly like this. What do you do and what do you avoid? I mean, I'm so generic, but some generic things try for children with a profile like this.
The key is reward charts, expectation equals anxiety. So if you're expecting them to perform for a sticker, that then is going to instantly make them feel that they are a failure straight away. So the anxiety is there. I mean, you know, the zones of regulation chart is, I mean, we've probably been given over the years about 15 of them, and they generally end up being torn up in a rage.
It's just too much expectation.
The irony of it is the fact that that is an expectation in itself. And, you know, PDA children, I have found with Maxi, he cannot, long-term goals equal anxiety also. They can't see that far. They're very to the point in that moment because the loss of control.
He probably doesn't have faith in himself that he can ever achieve that. Like, because he doesn't have the control over himself.
This is it.
So
and
you could say, oh, you'll do swimming on Friday if you're good, swimming on Friday, and think...
And this is it. And he's like, Friday?
I'm going to be really naughty on the first day. Like, I'm going to do all the things that I know you don't like.
Exactly.
So at least I've got an answer, because I'd rather a no on Monday than be good all that time and then let myself down on a Friday because I can't control this. I feel like that's the mentality, isn't it?
And it's like a little carrot dangling, you know, it doesn't work. So I think, you know, and then I started to sort of really do, again, you know, we're still no further with ASD diagnosis or anywhere along that, you know, because, you know, the lists and the waiting times is so astronomical at the moment. So I said to my husband, well, I'm just going to have to, you know, do my own research and, you know, start to find out, you know, what works and what doesn't. Like, I know what works with my own child. Like, how can I adapt that? Because I work in learning and development anyway. And I sort of thought, you know, but it's not that hard. You know, there must be a way. I think the top thing to do is the strewing method. You know, PDA children have a loss of autonomy, so they need to feel that they are in control at all times. Otherwise, they go into fight, flight, or freeze. And that's, you know, when we noticed when he was at mainstream, it's like, you need to sit here and you need to finish this, and you can't go and get a snack until you've written X, Y, and Z.
They run mainstream, but with control and compliance, don't they?
Yes, totally.
Kids in the class, one teacher, control and compliance.
And it obviously has to work because, you know, there's a lot of children and there's, you know, they have to be able to
work for some.
No, and it has to be, you know.
So what's the strewing method? What does that look like? What does that sound like?
The strewing method is just so basic. The strewing method is, you know, because this is the other thing, PDA children are more than capable to, you know, Max is, you know, doing Key Stage 1, and he is capable of Key Stage 1 and probably Key Stage 2 to a certain extent because he's obviously of his age. But it's how it's positioned. So the strewing method is, you know, you've always got to just think that whatever options you give them, it's a win-win situation for you as the educator or the parent, you know, if you're homeschooling. So you just get, you know, 5 to 6 different types of activities and you just chuck them on the table. And there's no saying, right, you're doing this first and then you're doing that, and then we're doing this. There's all the stuff. Why don't you have a look and you decide what we're going to do?
Yeah.
What's the most fun for you?
So
what do you want to do?
You don't mind what they choose.
Because it's a win-win, because every activity you're giving them, even if they choose the one that you don't really want to do.
So you're going to work on the sofa or you're going to work on the bar stool today? You're going to use a pen or a pencil? Is it that kind of language?
And it's, you know, where do we want to sit? Are we sitting at the table or are we sitting on the carpet? Well, if we're doing colouring, how about maybe we sit on the table?
You don't mind what you choose as long as you're doing it. Yeah.
Okay. But even in the choice of, are we building Lego? Are we doing like rhyming words? Are we doing crossword? You know, are we doing phonics crosswords? But having everything out, or are we just doing colouring? You know, but having it all out, the choice, and then they decide, you know, oh, I'm going to do this now. And that is the key that we found, is by giving them, because like I said, they are totally capable of doing the work.
Yeah.
That has never been a question. It has never been a question for us.
It's the negotiation beforehand, that pressure, isn't it? That demand and expectation, like you were saying before.
And it's the language used. There's a few key words that you just really can't say with Maxi, you know, which again, I think, you know, once the diagnosis is confirmed, the PDA elements, you cannot say, you can't, you must. It has to be, I wonder if you can find 10 words in that word search. I bet you can't. Again, it's that trickery to their brain.
On him and more, I wonder, what would it be
how do you spell cat? Like, I don't know. And sometimes it's really, you know, and I can see how mainstream education establishments can't do it, because using declarative language it takes a bit of getting
So that's
used
what it's
to.
called, declarative language.
Declarative language, and it takes a lot of getting used to, because I've got another 2 kids, there's 3 of them, and I'm like, get your shoes on, we've got to get ready, get your bag, where's your school bag, where's your lunch, what are you taking? With Max, it's how quickly can we get your shoes on before the transport comes? I wonder if you can get, and some days you just get caught out, you're a parent,
of course you do. We're not robots, of course we all get caught out, of course you do.
And another thing is what we found in terms of routine. Maxie does love a routine, but again, you need to steer on the side of caution that when it comes to getting ready in the mornings, obviously, if you think about how many requests you say to them that you need them to do, it's a demand for getting up. They're having breakfast, they've got to brush their teeth, they've got to get the uniform on. What we've found is leaving everything out the night before is a non-verbal prompt that tells him, when I wake up in the morning, my uniform's on the dining room table. So that means I've got to go to school and I've got to put that on.
And no one's telling me, no one's confronting me, no one's rushing me.
It's the norm now in our house. They come downstairs, they will sit and do they sit and watch a bit of TV, then they'll have breakfast, they get dressed. And it's, and it's a non-verbal, you're not telling him that he's got to do something. When he came back from the Peru and lasted at school, we ended up actually cutting him down to 3 days a week to 1 hour a day, because like we were told, do not take him off roll. Because I said, you know what, I'm just going to take him out of school full time and I'll just homeschool him.
It was very tempting.
Because it had gone far. All these peaks, it was highs and lows, peaks and troughs. It was all right one month, then it wasn't. Then he was at the PRU, and then it was okay, and then he went back, and it was just
getting ready to leave for school just for an hour. Like all those demands, like you were saying, shoes
such a
on,
pain.
toothbrush, get up, just for an hour to then
we
go
get to
wrong.
school.
It's just
you get home, and I was like, got about 40 minutes before I need to go back to school. So you're getting nothing done.
Yeah.
So and then again, obviously our case officer said, look, listen, we do basically have a effective pattern now of when he's not at school and he's in the right environment from going to the Peru, this meets his need.
Right.
So then, we spent 5 months looking for schools, specialist schools. Again, I think I looked at 14, and there were specialist schools, ASD schools, and the majority, I think, apart from one, said if they've got a PDA profile, we can't meet need because it's child-led learning and we don't have the facility like ASD.
I wasn't expecting that, because that definitely wouldn't be our reason for saying no, even though we would still say no to a child like Max. We wouldn't say no because of his PDA at all. What we would say no to is because he's too bright, he's too clever. We wouldn't be able to meet his academic need. We'd be able to meet his emotional, social, learning style. We wouldn't be able to meet his academic need. We wouldn't be able to offer him enough as far as his academic learning. And that would be why we would
say no.
Yeah.
So and then we found an SEMH school. So this is all now. This is all in the summer holiday. It
is mental health, isn't it? As well,
it is mental health, and we found. We'd gone to a school, and then I just randomly one night. You look on the local authorities list of specialist schools, and you're like, okay, I've done this one, another one off the list. And then we were looking at non-maintained independent, and our case officer was like,
some are great, some aren't.
Some are great, some aren't. She said
alternative provisions as well. Some are great, some aren't.
She said trying to get our local authority with a non-maintained independent. She said, we're gonna really, really struggle. So panel.
Expensive.
It's so expensive, and that's what it basically comes down to. How much money are they? How much money are they prepared to cough up on a child? So basically, we was just back and forth, and we sort of said, look, for us, we know that Maxie can survive with other children. Like, he does not have any social issues.
Yeah.
It is the emotional and the mental health issue that he can't cope with because of the PDA.
Yeah, so in the right environment, socially he can manage really well.
Yeah, and now we've got this quantitative evidence
Yeah.
that when he was at a PRU,
Yeah.
which
We love
reflects
people. Yeah.
and I remember thinking, I said to Darren, I'm so glad that we kept him in school and we basically didn't refuse it.
Because that was the proof you needed in order to say this is what meets his need.
Yeah.
Without that, it would just be your say so.
Yeah. So it went to panel twice. They sort of, we went to panel twice. There was a lot of, as you've probably guessed, there was a lot of, well, don't know, and we found, we were just constantly looking at schools. And then, but the main issue that we found is that across Surrey, a lot of the schools that can take PDA children, the intake isn't until year 3, because that's generally when a child has a diagnosis, is when they're 8.
Interesting.
So we were then found all these amazing, non-maintained schools. We found, really good.
He wasn't old enough for
mainstream,
right,
specialist school or public sector, mainstream specialist schools that were not non-maintained, and they said we don't take them to year 3. You've got another year. And I was thinking, we cannot.
You can't do another year.
He's not been at school for 2 years.
Right.
We've just sort of put a plaster on over the cut. We just hope for the best. But now it's getting to the longer he is away from.
You're thinking, where are we going to be in a year if we have to carry on this cycle?
Because, he had basically then got himself kind of, the back end of that term, he kind of got himself into burnout.
And
he didn't want to go to school. He didn't want to get off the sofa when he got in. He just didn't. He was resisting to everything. And then we found an SEMH school. And I think just by a pure stroke of luck, they came out. We went and visited them. And then we took Maxie and they sort of did, and I'm, he's currently there now. And, again, they sort of said, we don't think we can meet need because he's more early years foundation. And we sort of stood our ground and argued and said, because he's not been in school for 2 years, he has the capability to be able, he will catch up. So then they came to, and on the day that we went to go and visit his school, it was like, in terms of going to look at a specialist school for a child that has additional needs. So the fire alarm went off halfway through. So we got evacuated from the school. So then Max was like, what's going on? Am I coming to this school? Because we'd always been very, very honest with him. And we said, look, we don't feel that mainstream is the right option. It stresses you out. You don't like it. And now that you've been to this other school, this amazing PRU, we know that you love being in a smaller class.
He found that really validating, hearing that, because that's probably how he was feeling in his body. So to have the people closest to him agreeing with him that this feels right for you, we can see that this feels right for you, or this doesn't feel right for you, we can see this doesn't feel right for you. It's really incredibly validating.
And we just sort of
fix it, just knowing that you.
And I said to Max, it's like, over mind and body, that you are not going back to the mainstream classroom environment. So because you can't. But then what had happened when he had gone back from the PRU were the stress that it then caused his twin brother, because Maxie was dysregulated, and then he could hear it because it's this open plan primary school. It ended up sort of manifesting and snowballing at home, because Jake was then so upset that his twin brother was constantly outside, doing walking breaks.
He felt protective over him.
He felt protective, and he was just like, what's going on? So when we went to look at the specialist school, they sort of said, they rejected us, and then we argued it. And they came and visited him at mainstream one quick half an hour. And again, they sort of rejected. And I said to our case officer, like, I'm not having this now. I said, it's unacceptable. And I became that parent that
you have to. They give you no choice.
I literally made 2 formal complaints and I reported them to the LGOS, and that basically stuck a rocket up,
all of a sudden when you get the LDO involved.
And then literally I did all that the week before they was going back to panel for the 3rd time. Lo and behold, then panel named the specialist school that we've been to see. He, they sort of said, but their main issue was that he was not where he should have been at, academically. And I said, well, that's because he's not been at school for 2 years.
Also, ultimately, mental health has to come first. Surely that needs to be the focus. Academic learning comes second. So support him with his mental health and his emotional regulation and all of those things that they're obviously really good at.
But then again, and then pick up the pieces.
They'll catch up.
So that was at the start of the summer holidays last year, and obviously,
Okay.
as you know, nothing then happened for 6.5
Yeah.
weeks because
So you're a
school.
term into this new
So,
situation.
well, kind of, because they obviously then came back, and there was, a few issues with funding being released from our local authority to the specialist school.
Classic.
I know, I was thinking, could this get any more bonkers? We've finally now managed to get the school named, and the headmaster called me, and then randomly we found out that the headmaster was the previous headmaster of the PRU that he'd attended. And basically, like, long story short, the school that Maxie is now in basically was shut down by Ofsted immediately for being unsatisfactory. So I think just in our luck, they had then sacked everybody, basically, the completely new entire set of staff, from the trust level, from the higher, from board level, all the way down.
Good for the children, because if they were unsafe, not meeting needs, it was dangerous, unsafe,
and it was dangerous. And it was,
and I think it's so infuriating and upsetting for you.
It came, but we didn't really know any of this, and it wasn't until I was chatting to somebody else and said, "Oh, he's gotten into this school," and she said, "Wasn't that so and so?" And basically, they obviously had to change the name. I think it was closed for about 10 months while they recruited, restaffed, changed everything, and they basically then took the old headmaster from what was the PRU.
Okay.
So I then spoke to the old headmistress at the PRU, and she said, "Listen, the school had a bad reputation." She said, "But now
they can only go up. Actually.
They can only go up."
Yeah,
and
she said, get a lot of guidance and support and lots of eyes on them to make sure they do. So that's probably quite a good position to be in, actually.
We just thought, wow, we've really, this is a real added bonus, that because the reputation has followed it, people are more reluctant to not send them. So I think that was a massive factor, that we gotten in. So it was, a blessing to a certain extent. But, we didn't.
How's he doing one term into this new
So
school?
he started... we never sent him back to mainstream because we knew that the LA had named the specialist school. I just said to my husband, if he doesn't start until January 2025, we keep him off for another 3 months. He's had such disruptive.
You've got it. It's been named.
Yeah, we've basically homeschooled him. Like, he has been out of school, but he hasn't done any schoolwork at school. It was just a box ticking exercise because we didn't want him off roll for 2 years. So we got the dates that he started on the 1st of October, and then he had a phased introduction, but he did so well. And the phased introduction was supposed to be until the start of November, and sort of 2 weeks in, the headmaster called me and he said, "Listen," he said, he's doing so well and he can just start full time next week. So he's gone. So this is, this is what...
That just says it all, doesn't it?
So this is his, at the end of this, January, this is his third month ever at school, and then he'll be 8 in October. So it just goes to show that the right setting.
There is so much to say about this, isn't there? Because thank goodness the Senko was knowledgeable enough and gave you the advice of sticking on roll, because that would have been such a different situation.
But even our Senko from mainstream, she said, "I do not know much about PDA." She said, "In fact, I know nothing about it." She said, "Because the problem is," she said, "because his behaviour is so explosive and disruptive," she said, we can't have him in the school. And if he gets permanently excluded," she said, "if you, and a lot," and this is what I say to, I've become now in this community, I get a lot of questions, and I say, "Well, I'm just going to take him off roll." And I say to everybody, do not.
I totally understand why they're feeling like
totally.
That.
And I say, that makes sense, but it's absolutely a no-no. Even if you can, read it.
Because it puts the responsibility of finding suitable education on the parent, whereas if they're still on roll, the responsibility is with the local authority, and therefore so is the funding, there is the searching, there is the courts, all of that is all, paid for and organised by the local authority.
But I can see how parents, I'm pretty switched on, and I tell you what, Jordan, there were times where the countless emails, the reading of SEN law.
Let's just say there is no judgment with parents that listen to this that have a child with a PDA profile who have decided to homeschool. There is absolutely no
There's
judgment.
a lot of people that do it though.
I've seen it, and I'm gutted that you have been let down so much. Your child's been let down so much to the point of you've had to do it, and I really hope that this is the right decision for you, and it obviously was at the time, because otherwise you wouldn't have done it. So there is no judgment here.
No,
it's
not
just
at
a shame
all.
that the system, the children have to fail and are being made to fail so badly in order to get the help they need. It's just so unfair.
So, and another thing, I think the only reason that we have been so lucky is that we live in Surrey.
Right.
We live in a big county. There is a lot of schools there, even though we were clutching at straws in terms of trying to find one. If you live in other parts of the country,
it's just a battle.
You are going to have no option
to... Yeah, we've got one special school in the whole of Cornwall. One special school. So
that's insane.
So if your child doesn't fit the special school mould, which none of my people
do, that's just so wild.
School. So I've had the last 3 year 7s I've had to leave my primary school. I've gone to no school. Similar situation to you, but they're 11. It's shocking. It's absolutely shocking. So it's just, the whole thing is just shocking.
It's really unfortunate.
I'm gutted for the parents.
And I think the stress that it puts on parents.
Absolutely.
I was lucky. My husband and I, we both worked for big corporations. Like quite kind of not protected, but the flexible working, inclusion and diversity. There's a massive push on big corporations, and that kind of saved us because
right.
I basically, unbeknown to our local authority, we're about £12,000 out of profit, because we've had to pay for extra childcare, we've had to take unpaid parental leave, we've had to take annual leave, we've had to, pay for all this extra stuff.
So there's financial stress and emotional stress.
And it's like, at the back of your mind, am I going to get sacked from my job? Because I'm really not to, even though, we were always very straight up and transparent with our employers, there's always that bit in the back of your mind. Are they gonna? Is she just? Is she becoming problematic now because of her kid?
With your child as well, because it's trying to navigate that. It's home with homeschooling, or any demand to try and get them into school because you have to. All of that. It's just, there's such a big mess to unravel.
And also, if and I'm not throwing local authorities under the bus, but there is an element of that is the main issue, If you do not have, we were quite fortunate, our case officer has got a child with PDA and she's got another child who's neurodivergent. And it was like all aligned. But there are these case officers, Jordan, they have up to 250 children, plus
we've got, I only know from Cornwall that there's 18 case officers and there's 5,500 children on their caseload.
That's even more insane.
So how could they ever put the time in to support these families, to support these children, to find suitable education?
It's not effective. It is not effective.
They're the ones with EHCPs. That doesn't even include the ones without EHCPs. It is just off the scale.
And I think, with PDA children, it's estimated. I mean, this is an estimate. Right. And I was chatting to another teacher the other day and I was saying 70%, 70, are not in education of PDA children.
That is huge.
But again, the numbers are in this grey area because of the diagnosis.
Because as well. If parents are choosing to homeschool before they get a diagnosis, then does that count? Because they might not ever go for diagnosis.
But then what is their diagnosis? Are they going off the homeschooling number because it's ASD or ADHD?
Yeah. You were saying, I suppose, just to round off, really, you were saying that the Senko doesn't know as much. There's the PDA Society, but again, there's not much information out there.
You go on the PDA Society and there's an acronym called the PANDA approach, which is if you are a teacher or a parent and you're seeing these traits of a PDA child, like the PANDA approach is it's probably the best things. Like,
I keep it on my phone so that I can send it to you because I think it's brilliant. Here we go. So we've got pick battles, adaptation, disguise and manage demands, negotiation and collaboration, and anxiety management are helpful approaches to support
They're helpful.
children, aren't they?
I would say, what we have realised, and I say to any my Instagram, I am getting hundreds of messages a week
this information isn't out
from
there.
teachers.
Yeah,
from teachers, from primary and secondary and parents. And my top tip to any of them is pick your battles wisely. If they don't want to sit at the table and they want to sit on the floor, really, what is the issue with that?
Right.
What is the issue? Who cares?
Right.
Whether or not that's a parent. And Maxie, sometimes dinner time in our house can be when it all falls apart.
Yeah.
My eldest son, there's an element, and he's like, well, no, Maxie doesn't look autistic. And I'm like, well, not all children. That's just that age. He's a teenager.
So it's that idea of making reasonable adjustments, isn't it? So if there's a teacher listening to this with a child that sounds similar to Maxie in your class, or your parent, and you want strategies, make reasonable adjustments to support the child. So if you want them, if it's really important that they complete this work,
is it do or die? Is there going to be? Is it really necessary?
Could you adapt the work task to make it more fun or suitable? Could you offer more than one work task so they can make a choice? Could they do it with their shoes off? Could they do it on the carpet? Could they do it at a different time when the other children
can they finish it? And what we've noticed with Max's specialist school is that they don't do reward charts, but they do sort of entice them in. If we can get our core, reading and writing work done, then you can play on Scratch and you can do stuff. So there is
a motivator.
There's a motivator and an incentive.
We all need a motivator and an incentive. That's
why
totally. We get paid to do work. There is a motivator there. It's just it needs to be in collaboration with the child, doesn't it, rather than in control. In conflict in that
and
way.
There is an element of Max's school that they do have a point system.
Mm-hmm.
But Maxie does work quite well on a point system, and it allows
lose
him
the points. You just
doesn't lose the point, and this is
That's
the key.
point, isn't it?
You don't get them taken away.
No.
You don't get that like on a reward chart where it's like, we did this yesterday, we did do this today.
Work. I hate it when they never get the thing. I like motivating because I think it needs to be
short, sharp bursts.
Short, sharp. You get it, and then you start again, and then you get it.
This is exactly how they do it. He gets it.
Right.
It'll either be they get I think there's a couple from when you speak. It's really hard to try and get out of a 7-year-old kid as well. Like, what do you actually do at your school? And he's like, oh, I can't remember what I've done all day. And you think, God, it's just I remember being
again, it means he'll do a lesson, he'll learn his reward, and he'll get his reward. Learn his reward, get his reward.
So there's always an offer of, or maybe we can do this, but they can get points for anything. just like tidying up.
Yeah.
Little like
great
course.
Question. Great looking.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh wow.
That was really kind. You did that. Yeah. Find the positive. Find what they're doing well, rather than looking for what they're not doing well.
And I think that's
really great advice.
And that's and another sort of key sort of piece of advice is praising them for participating, because a lot of Maxie, they have a really low self-esteem also, and low self-esteem even before they've been through maybe quite a traumatic education experience already. So just even they're picking up the pen, oh wow, well done, and it's about, because they suffer from really low self-esteem. Self-esteem is obviously linked to anxiety.
And they've always been told, and it's probably down to experiences as well, right? They've always been not good enough or not quite reaching the mark, and
I think because if they're
internalized,
and if they've been through the mainstream school, there are some children that managed to survive in mainstream, and I'm not saying it's totally not viable, but I think a PDA child can, to a certain extent,
with the right scaffolding, with the right support, with the right environment.
If it's a small class, if there's a lot of TAs, if they're
the Senko and teacher that are understanding about the PDA profile, if there are reasonable adjustments made, all of those things.
Then there may be a possibility, but at some point, my experience and what I have been sent, and messages that I've read and emails, it is this is the other thing, it's the masking.
Talking about your audience, because you've built a really strong audience of parents and teachers that are passionate about PDA and want to learn more, and you're creating something, aren't you, in order to support them. Shall we finish talking about that a little bit?
I think the one thing that we have struggled and still struggle with is the lack of resources. And I've been reading a really amazing book by, name is Professor Elizabeth Newton, and she was a professor at Nottingham University, and she was the one who, through the 80s, had all these parents that their children had these ASD diagnoses, and the parents were saying, key elements of these traits that do not match my child. Like there's something not quite right. And so she then investigated and did her research and said, these children have PDA. This is going back to the 80s, but there's no support for you. There's obviously the PDA Society, which are amazing, but I've set up, it's a community, an online community where parents can have each other, because there's so many support functions out there for parents for children who've got ASD, that have got ADHD, that have got ADD, but there is nothing really there in terms of, there's no sort of,
and there's no judgment on parents with a child with a PDA profile, isn't there?
Yeah,
so
because
much
they
shame and judgment.
Because they look from the outside looking in, typical naughty kids. They're defiant. They won't do something. You're in the shop,
letting them get gentle parents, and all of these kind of archaic beliefs.
Yeah. And low demand parenting is not about letting them get away with stuff, and it's not about letting them walk all over you. It's about teaching and guiding. Yeah, so I'm going to set it up. It's going to close actually on Thursday, because I only want to open it 2 or 3 times a year, because I want to keep it quite. It's
I can see what you want it to be safe.
I want it to be safe, because there's a lot of people, mums and dads, that feel, that they are judged, but it's going to be, there'll be guest speakers, but there'll also be, I'll do trainings, but it's also because the reality is, and like Professor Elizabeth Newson has said from the start, no amount of clinical research makes more sense than a parent of a child to a PDA child,
your child best,
who experiences the day in and the day out, the little things, the wrong cup being given for starters, the touching of the remote control.
To know that you can be completely open and raw with somebody else who gets it without holding back in at all, actually, and knowing that you won't be faced with any blame or shame.
Totally.
Because there'll just be acceptance. It's pure acceptance, isn't it?
It's pure, and the one that, we felt incredibly alone in it. It's just like people say, well, what's wrong with Maxie? Why isn't he at school? Oh, he's got PDA, and people are like, what's that? And it just got so, it gets so frustrating trying to repeat it every time. Like, well, it's kind of like this, and it's kind of like that. But, again, that became very apparent very quickly from the get-go with my Instagram, that everybody was just, I just feel so lonely. We're walking on eggshells. We're broken.
Yeah.
And I just thought, what?
If you've had a really bad day or going through a really hard time, and you're going through the education fight or whatever it is, just knowing you've got an army of supporters that get it behind you,
and it's not just you.
You're doing all that you can. Have you tried this? Have you tried this? God, that must be so strengthening and important.
And I said to Dan, if there'd have just been sometimes, during the whole, when we were really in the gutter of panic and despair, someone said to me, that's totally normal.
Yeah.
Just because he's throwing a cup at your head because you've told him to pick a pencil up, and he's saying that he hates you.
It's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah.
This is the other great thing about PDA kids. They move on very quickly because of their resilience.
And they love big as well. Like, can we talk about some of the good things? Like, they love so big. They care so much about what you think of them, how you feel, relationships.
And
they're just so desperate to be loved, aren't they?
So desperate to be loved. And and I forget, I can't remember. I saw it online. No, actually, I think it was at Peace Parents. I mean, Dr. Casey Enlich, I think her name is. And she did a reel, and she said, when they're in that mode where they are pretty vile, she said, just remember that they are saying, just please love me. Can you just please love me? Like, just love me, because I'm so frightened. And that's the only reason that they get so out of control, because they are in fear that nobody basically, that they're frightened that nobody loves them. And I think that for me was one of the biggest things. I just thought, that was like a mindset shift straight away. And I just thought, I'm
going to show you that you are loved and you are lovable.
And if it's safe to do so, I say to parents, like, give them a physical hug, like, show them. And I always say to Maxie, you are so safe. Like, you've got nothing to worry about. This is, you are so safe.
You can never do anything to make them not love you. It's so important to hear, isn't it?
So important.
This is such a great conversation to have, and so important. Thank you so much for joining me, Jessie.
Thank you for inviting me.
And parents listening to this, either feeling validated that they're doing the right thing, or confirmed that I knew they did, I knew they were
Yeah.
like that. Where can they find you to find out more? Because I really think that they will, come.
Just literally, I read and respond every single DM that I get on Instagram, and that is something that I've always wanted to do.
So it's at Mrs. Jessie Towns with a Z.
Yeah, that's it, with a Z.
I'm so pleased that you're out here doing this. Yeah, it really is amazing. And it feels even more
Thank you.
like it comes from a parent who's lived it.
And I remember I did the first reel, and, first reel had about 10,500 people view it, and then the messages started
coming. I bet people are thinking, finally, someone's
I'm not alone, And it's just a crazy journey at times. You think, wow.
Oh, I'm so pleased you're doing it, and I'm so pleased that I have somewhere to send all the people.
Yeah, do it.
I will. And thank you so much for joining me on a Monday
Thank you,
evening, Jessie.
Thank you for inviting me, Jordan.
Of course, anytime. I feel like we could chat for a long time, and I feel like I need to get you back on, and we need to discuss even more. Maybe next year and see how this journey's going.
Let's do it in a year's time and see how we're getting on.
Deal.
Amazing. Perfect. Thanks you so much, Jordan.
Evening.
And you, bye.
Bye.